everybody. Welcome to the BWC Online Bible Study. Today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 16. As we look at Genesis chapter 16, I really want you to take a moment to think about when you're making decisions, do you consult God first? That's what the main focus of this lesson from the Bible is going to lead us to. Do you consult God before you make decisions? Or do you just go with your feelings, go with the flow, go with what seems right, and just full force jump into things? And we're going to see where that can lead when we do that, and talk about really how much better it'll be when we stop and ask God before we do things. So we'll start with Genesis chapter 16, verse 1. It says, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him. She had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, 'The Lord has prevented me from having children, so go sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her.' And Abram agreed to Sarai's proposal." In the study notes that I have in my Fire Bible, it says it was customary among the people of Mesopotamia for a wife who could not have children to have her servant bear children for her. The children would then belong to the wife. Regardless of this custom, having children this way was not how God had intended to give Abram and Sarai a family. Remember that God had promised Abram descendants, more than the stars in the sky. They still had no children, so you don't have descendants if you don't have children. And he had made this promise to them. And so this idea that Sarai is cooking up really kind of like the culture of the day, the things that go on in the society that they're living in, that are, normal and accepted, but not God's plan, not God's way. The culture will tell you all kinds of things are normal and accepted, but when you read the Word of God, you might find out that these things don't line up with His Word. And it's sort of like when you choose not to follow the instructions in the instruction manual, whatever it is you're trying to build is probably not going to come together right. And so when we don't do things the way God has set them out for us, sometimes we end up with consequences that we maybe didn't expect to have, or that we don't, want to have, because when you do it God's way, it's always going to be better. So here in this moment, they had this opportunity. She throws out this proposal to him. Hey, let's just use this servant over here, and you can have a baby with her, and that way we will have a child. But they didn't stop and ask God, just like Adam and Eve in the garden. We had talked about that a few weeks ago because we're in Genesis right now. If Adam and Eve had stopped in that moment in the garden and said, when Satan was tempting them and said, "Hey, well, I'm not really sure about this. Let's consult God." But the problem is, they didn't want God's answer, because if they would have wanted God's answer, they could have paused and they could have stopped and they could have asked God. They were being tempted and they wanted whatever it was more than they wanted God's answer. And so here we have Abram and Sarai who really wanted to have children. They wanted them so bad. And instead of pausing to ask God, "Hey, is this your way? Is this the way you want us to do this? Is this what you were trying to say to us?" They just went ahead, and we're going to see where that leads them. And it says, "So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress Sarai with contempt. And Sarah said to Abram, 'This is your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me.'" So Sarah was the one who actually came to Abram with the idea. And he just went right along with it. He didn't, I don't know if maybe in her heart she was hoping he would say no. We don't get to know that part. We don't know what they were thinking about when they said these things to one another. But here it is that Hagar is pregnant, and instead of things going happy and nice like Sarah had kind of thought it out to be in her heart, the servant was now gloating in the fact that she was able to get pregnant, and treating Sarai with contempt. And it says, Abram replied, "Look, she's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit." So then Sarai treated her so harshly that she finally ran away. So this is kind of one of those stories in the Bible where you see every single person doing everything wrong. And that's the way life is a lot of times too. Like we're all trying to walk this out a step at a time, and we'll find ourselves in a place where maybe we've done something wrong or someone else has done something wrong to us. And we're going to see how God handles it in the middle of this situation. And it says, so the angel of the Lord found Hagar beside the spring of water in the wilderness along the road of Shur. And the angel said to her, "Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from, and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she replied. And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority." And then he added, "I will give you more descendants than you can count." So I don't know if you've ever been in a position like that before, where you've been under authority that you either didn't agree with or that really was kind of doing you wrong. Because here in this moment, even though Abram is called of God, he's a man of God, he loves the Lord, Sarai loves the Lord, they missed it on this one. They weren't doing things the way that they were supposed to do them, and they had mistreated Hagar. But Hagar was also wrong too in the way that she was treating Sarai. But she was put into a position that she never should have been put into, because Abram and Sarai didn't consult God before they started making this decision. And in the study notes, again, it says that as the story unfolds, the angel of the Lord is revealed as God himself speaking to Hagar. So the Lord himself comes and finds Hagar in this moment. And he begins to make some promises to her. And it says, the angel said, "You are now pregnant, and I will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael," which means God hears. "The Lord hears your cries of distress. This son of yours will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all of his relatives." It says here in the study notes, it says the name Ishmael means God hears. It signifies that God realized how unfairly Abram and Sarai had treated Hagar. The name is a judgment against Abram, because God hates injustice and imposes justice and judgment on people who mistreat those within the church. And against everyone from 1612, Ishmael, along with his descendants, would be a man of power and courage, but he would know conflict also, for his desire for conflict would cause him to struggle either for or against God. The choice would be his. And so we will see that play out in the life of Ishmael. He was not the one that God had made a promise to Abraham through. Abram and Sarai went their own way. They did their own thing. And consequences have come because of that throughout the generations. The promise was still coming through Isaac, who wasn't there yet. But trouble had arisen because of the decision that Abram and Sarai made without consulting God first. Thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, "You are the God who sees me." She also said, "I have truly seen the one who sees me." Excuse me. So that well was named Beer-lahai-roi, which means the well of the living one who sees me. And it can still be found in Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave Oh, I'm sorry, y'all. So Hagar gave Abram a son, and Abram named him Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. So as we wrap that up, sorry for the little coughing at the end there. The pollen outside has gotten me this year. So as we wrap this up, though, as we look at the word today, I just want you to step back and think for a minute before you make decisions. You know, if you're making big decisions, seek the Lord first. Ask him what he wants you to do. Maybe it's financial decision. Maybe it is a moral decision. Maybe it's a decision in how to handle something in a relationship with another person. Maybe it's in your marriage. Whatever it is, God is always going to lead you in the right direction. It's not always an easy direction. When God leads you, you know, Abram and Sarai having to wait all this time for God to bring what he had promised to bring to them was not easy. And you can see why they would want to give up and try to kind of find their own way instead of really seeking God in the moment. But the truth is, it's always going to come out better when we do it God's way. So that's what I'll leave you guys with today, Genesis chapter 16, and I will catch you back again in Genesis chapter 17.